Hello there, you're watching the press preview, a first look at what is on the front pages. Time then to see what is making the headlines with the senior associate editor at the New Statesman, Rachel Cunliffe, and the Sun's political editor, Harry Cole. Great to see both of you. So to the front pages then, let's start with the Eye, which hears there are disagreements among Liz Truss's camp of supporters, some of whom are said to believe she's not doing enough to tackle the cost of living crisis. The Guardian has seen analysis suggesting that Ms Truss's tax plans would cost £50 billion to implement, but wouldn't do enough to help those worst affected by the issue. Well, with hosepipe bans projected to last until October, The Telegraph reports that this year will be the driest since 1976 amid drought conditions. The Metro leads with the first day of the trial of the former footballer Ryan Giggs. He's accused of assault and of coercive and controlling behaviour. He denies the charges. The Star quoting from the prosecution's opening remarks in that trial. And likewise, it is also the big story for The Sun. Well, a reminder, by scanning the QR code you'll see on screen during the programme, you can check out the front pages of tomorrow's newspapers while you watch us. But let's bring in our guests now, Rachel Cunliffe and Harry Cole. More papers coming in, have to say, perhaps a little bit late with the news of Olivia Newton-John. But let's kick off, Harry, with the Eye, shall we? Tensions in Liz Truss's camp over her offer on the cost of living. What is she offering? Is it enough, and will it change?
Yes, it almost certainly will change. I've been banging on for days, it feels like now, almost weeks, that neither of the two candidates are really grappling with the size of the problems that are going to be in their in tray should they win on September the 5th. A winter of discontent is something of an understatement when you look at some of the predictions of the size of bills and the energy price cap reaching £3,400, £3,700, some people will say, and the difference literally between heating and eating for millions of people across this country. I think both the candidates are slowly realising that actually, Rishi Sunak's VAT on energy bills, suspension for a year, saving £160, drop in the ocean, not going to touch the sides. Same for perhaps Liz Truss's cut to NICs, which will save someone earning the median wage, I think about £170 a year. None of this really is going to be enough. So there's been lots of mudslinging over the weekend about who will do more or what that might be. We'll be hearing a lot more from Rishi Sunak on this tomorrow, but there's a sort of dawning realisation on his camp, I think, that he's no longer the Chancellor. And if he really wanted to make all these changes, perhaps he should have stuck around in government. Whereas Liz Truss is saying, well, in the long term, handouts can't be a sustainable answer. But in the short term, the reality means that people need a bailout, and they're going to need a big one this year.
Yes, and Mr Sunak expected to say this winter is going to be extremely tough for families up and down the country, and there is no doubt in my mind that more support will be needed. As you said, he could have been the person to put that into place. Question is, who is now focusing on it? We know a few of them were off on holiday last week. Rachel, are they back now? And yet there will still be no sense of an emergency budget or planning or COBRA or banging of heads together, or is it happening behind the scenes? And if it's behind the scenes, then perhaps the optics are now that we need to see it happening.
Yeah, I think the optics of this really weren't great. To have the Prime Minister off on his belated mini honeymoon at the same time as the Chancellor was also off and the Chief Secretary to the Treasury was also on holiday. Now, I am very much in the camp that says that ministers do a very difficult job and work very hard throughout the year, and they do deserve their holidays too. However, one kind of feels that at this particular moment, facing this sort of summer crisis, especially since the Prime Minister is not going to be the Prime Minister in 4 weeks' time, maybe it would have been smart, at least from a PR position, if nothing else, to delay that holiday by a couple of weeks, just so it didn't feel like this was a country facing a crisis with no one in control. Now, I also understand, of course, Boris Johnson is a caretaker Prime Minister. He said that he while the leadership contest is going on, he wouldn't make any major legislative changes, which is exactly the role that he should be playing. But there are things that he could be doing. He could be working with both of the candidates and their teams so that whoever is Prime Minister doesn't start from scratch on day one, could be preparing the groundwork, and also could be sort of offering a message to the country that this government does understand how serious this crisis is. And up until this point, really, I think up until the last couple of days, that sense that the government and the candidates get it has been lacking. Now, maybe that's an unfair thing to say. Maybe there has been a lot of work going on behind the scenes, but we haven't seen it and we haven't really felt it.
So to The Guardian then, Harry, Liz Truss's emergency tax and spending pledges could cost upwards of £50 billion a year. Experts warning it will fail to help the worst off deal with the rising cost of living. Famously, tax cuts don't necessarily help pensioners, for example. The Times, which we'll get shortly too, has Dominic Raab suggesting that Truss's plan is an electoral suicide note. Have people made their minds up, those who are voting for our next Prime Minister? Or will this make an impact?
I think the noise is off from the Sunak campaign would suggest that they are getting increasingly desperate. Dominic Raab, I'm old enough to remember 3 or 4 weeks ago when he was suggesting that he is so important and definitely not made up because he was fired as Foreign Secretary. Appointment as Deputy Prime Minister meant that he had to stay above the fray. He wouldn't be weighing in and getting his hands dirty in this campaign because he has such an important constitutional role. And here he is getting down in the gutter and suggesting that a tax cut would be electoral doom, which is a bit odd because tonight there's a poll from Redfield and Wilton, a polling company, which shows that Liz Truss, actually the one offering tax cuts immediately rather than in 7 years' time, is actually beating Keir Starmer in the polls and and Rishi Sunak would not beat Keir Starmer. Look, a lot of this is a very confected August row. I do think this leadership campaign has gone on perhaps a little bit too long. I think they probably could have done it in 4 weeks rather than 8. But no one seemed to want to ruin their August holidays by doing a transition and a handover of power in the middle of August rather than when everyone was back in September. There's going to be a lot of slightly sort of hollow mudslinging for the next sort of 4 weeks. But Rachel's absolutely right. Remember, when Boris Johnson was ousted at the beginning of July, there was a moment where it looked like the party might actually move against him. And actually force him out immediately, the sort of automatic ejection, so to speak. And actually, no, the sort of wiser hands came about. The sort of 1922 committee said, actually, no, let's do this with some dignity. He won't make any major policy announcements. And now the very same people are screaming that, they were worried that Boris Johnson would use his last month in power to do things they didn't like, and now saying he's not doing anything. A Cobra meeting isn't going to make the blindest bit of difference. What will need to be done is an emergency budget, whoever wins, in September, where both candidates need to admit, really, that they have to get real on the size of the problem.
Yeah, absolutely. A confected August row, but it's real life, is it not, for real people?
Nothing's going to change. Nothing's going to change in the next 3 weeks with a lame duck prime minister, a chancellor who knows he's not going to be the chancellor in the next couple of weeks. Actually, it would be easy. If anything, they should expedite the leadership election, but that's not going to happen. But I don't think anything fundamentally is going to change without a budget, and only a new prime minister and a new chancellor will have that sort of renewed mandate to actually make these decisions. Yes,
indeed, and it's Gordon Brown who was the first to say, come on, get on with it, everybody. Nobody is at the wheel, is the way the Metro puts it. Does Labour need to come out and start fighting on this as well, or are we just in the sort of the August doldrums when people are on holiday and drifting in and out, and everyone's sitting there? I mean, people are literally working out how to get their hands on sleeping bags so they don't have to turn the gas boiler on, aren't they? Come the winter.
Oh, I think what you're saying about a Labour policy vacuum is exactly right. We have had an opposition party put forward a radical policy on energy bills today. It's Ed Davey and the Liberal Democrats, and he's called for what he calls energy bill furlough, which is effectively for the government to cancel the increase in the energy cap and to absorb the cost, the full 36 billion cost, partly through an increased windfall tax and partly through general taxation. That's quite a smart move, I think, just in terms of PR, calling it energy bills furlough. People understand what that means after the pandemic. And I think people kind of got used during COVID to the idea that when there was a really big national crisis, the government could step in. They could do absolutely unprecedented things like lockdown, but also like putting the tax system into reverse, which was what furlough was. They could find the money for mass testing, mass vaccination rollouts. We did incredible things in order to combat a major national crisis. And I think there really is a sense up and down the country that we are facing another crisis, a different crisis now this winter, with energy bills and with the cost of living crisis. And there is bewilderment as to why the government hasn't committed to stepping in yet. And indeed, why
They have,
Labour
Rachel,
isn't
they
calling for
have.
it.
They already have. We already spent £40 billion this year bailing people out. This idea of a furlough 2.0 is going to be another £36 billion on top of the £400 billion we've already spent on COVID. At some point, and this is where I have some sympathy with Sunak, is that someone has to stand up and go, hang on, who is paying for this? Are we actually going to bankrupt the country because everyone's got a taste of the idea that when the going gets tough, the instant reaction is a government bailout? At some point, people are already getting £1,200 from the government directly in handouts. What point do you actually? So the energy furlough idea of Ed Davey is he's saying that everyone should get sort of another £450. But then why are we using that system, such a blunt tool, to give people who can easily afford a raise in energy bills money that they don't need? It seems slightly mad. I think it's gone a bit doolally post COVID, than that massive government spending is the answer.
And I completely take that point, and I think that's a very legitimate way of looking at it. But you asked, at what point do we say it's enough? Unfortunately, even with the support that has been offered, and it was offered before the price cap increased by £500, you are going to see children going hungry. Anna mentioned pensioners a moment ago in terms of people who a tax cut wouldn't necessarily help. There are more children in poverty in this country than there are pensioners, many of them in households whose benefits are not going up in line with inflation, who are not helped by the tax system.
Rachel,
so is the new Prime Minister prepared to see children starve? Is she prepared to see, are they prepared to see
This is the debate that's incredibly unhelpful, because you make it so binary in black and white that if you're not doing anything, you're letting children starve. But actually, the most effective thing you can do is targeted support, which is actually what is happening now. Which is that actually people that most need it are getting the most money. Everyone's getting 150 quid off their council tax. I believe there's a £400 energy pound rebate. But actually, the people that really need the money are getting the most of it. This idea from Ed Davey that you can have this blanket scheme where everyone gets money just seems bonkers to me.
I wasn't advocating for Ed Davey's scheme specifically. I was just pointing out that it was on the table and it was more radical than anything that either of the two candidates had so far proposed.
But there's a big difference between letting children starve, as you so emotively put, and giving everyone free cash, right?
Rachel's being good. She can hear my vibe that we need to stop there. Apologies. We will no doubt talk more about it a bit later on. I was just going to show the Times as well, which has just dropped. It also has some of the figures that Sunak's talking about. Every household will get £400 off their energy bills. Those on means-tested benefits would receive a further £650. Sources close to Sunak saying his priority would be to increase support for the most vulnerable. There's also likely to be an increase in the £400 universal payment. So those were some of the figures, Harry, that you were mentioning there, but we've got lots more still to come, including the sad news too from the world of entertainment tonight. The actress and singer Olivia Newton-John has died. We will pay tribute to her next. Well, welcome back. You're watching the press preview. We are joined once again by Rachel Cunliffe and Harry Cole. Welcome back to both of you. Weather-related matters. Rachel, you kick off. The Daily Telegraph, the driest year since 1976. Drought looms. We've been told that for a few days now, haven't we? And meantime, in related but slightly different matters, a flood of all floods on your road, Rachel.
Not quite my road, but certainly around the corner from my house. Burst water pipe. The road is several feet underwater, damage to many of the houses, some children who had to get rescued by firefighters who were stuck in an apartment block. Thames Water is trying to fix the problem. But I think that the juxtaposition of these two stories together, we're kind of due to go into drought over the next few days. There's been little or no rainfall in parts of the country since for 144 days. And a lot of the water companies are telling people to conserve water. There are hosepipe bans in some parts of the country. And then you look at just how much water is lost through leakages every single day. I think 3 billion litres, the equivalent of 1,000 Olympic-sized swimming pools. Thames Water admits on its website that it loses a quarter of the water that it handles. And you kind of think, OK, this is a massive crisis here, but there are structural issues here too. Everyone could do their bit, but maybe it's not all about hose pipes.
Yes, well, I mean, you know, a lot of people like to raise the leakage issue, but you would hope that at some point we can have a government that future-proofs itself, Harry, but it feels like we're fighting fires left, right and centre, and we have been for years now. You know, we need to really think about it, don't we?
It was just a country that have not been good at two things. One, we haven't been very good at hot weather, or indeed cold weather, or indeed wind. I remember, I'm old enough to remember 4 or 5 months ago when it got a bit windy and they told us all to stay at home. We're just a country that's very bad at weather. And we're also a country that's very bad at actually flogging off our national assets and privatising things, and then not really holding a rod over those privatised assets to make sure they actually don't take the mick anymore and actually do things properly. The water companies being a great example of that, and the energy companies, again, being a fantastic example of that. The profits we saw in recent days, you know, it all chimes into just a general sense of this is a government that's been around a little bit too long. It's lost its teeth. Maybe perhaps, you know, some people need to come in and start cracking the whip a bit, or they let the other guys have a go. We've
got just 30 seconds now on Olivia Newton-John. Not surprisingly, her face all over the newspapers, Rachel, the sad news today.
Very, very sad. Absolutely iconic. I think the vast majority of viewers know her for Greece, but I've been reading up on her since the news broke, and I've been reading about her phenomenal work as an activist for cancer research and better cancer treatment, and really one of those people who had a celebrity platform and has properly used it to try and change lives. So yes, incredibly sad news.
Rachel, Harry, thank you both very much indeed there with the news that Olivia Newton-John has died at the age of 73.